Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, we're middle of Maimer 26. The Toldos. This week's 100 years ago. And it's chapter 103, Kuf Gimel, page Kuf Tzadik Zayin, 197. So here we're middle of a story. Actually, literally. Sefirah from the word story. So there's three interpretations in Sefirah. Mispar, discussed at length, number. The number of existence, meaning quantity, and you reveal quality in it. We went over to Sefirah from the word Sipur and Haggadah, which we're middle of, coming to a conclusion actually. This last chapter in it. Then there will be Sefirah from Evan Sapir, Behirus, illumination. What's the story that the Sefirahs tell us? That's what the Rebbe Rashab has been concerned with. So he speaks about it in levels. It's really extremely eloquent, like an art piece of art. That the first thing the Sefirahs reveal to us is the Kelim reveal the Ur. Ur is like called potential, energy, the energy of Chesed, the energy of Chachma. The Keli grounds it and tells you the story. It would be like the faculties that you have in your nefesh, if they're not expressed through an organ or through a limb or through an instrument, it remains concealed. That's the first level. Then it says the Sefirot of Atzilus also reveal the source of that's higher than Atzilus, the levels that are higher than Atzilus, meaning like the Keiches. In Keiches it's be the Keiches Nalamim, the Keiches Atzmim. So it reveals to you that there are things that a potential state that's beyond what's revealed. It's not just what you see, what you get. There's a whole story behind the story. All the way in the words of the Elamus, it reveals the 10 hidden spheres from before the Tzimtzum. So the root that brought these faculties and forces and attributes into place, that was the Machshavas Nalomes. That's the words from Rabbi Shem Tov, who's quoted by the Pardes in explaining the story, the hidden thoughts. And then in Maimer Elatel, this in chapter 99, he starts another level. And that besides is revealing to us the faculties and the structure of existence, and the root of the structure reveals to us the bligvul of Elokus. And he explains this. First he explains it in the context of when you look into heaven, Shamayim Mesaprim, the heavens tell the story. What do they tell us? They tell us about something that's beyond Gvul. The fact that existence, that nothing, no celestial body dies, that's constantly moving, that's coordinated, even though they're all Gvulim, tell you that there's some choreographer that's beyond Gvul. That's chapter 99. And then he went and explained that, and that's what we're in the middle of now, is how the Esser Spheres reveal Bli Gvul. And basically the point was of Maven Dover Metech Dover. That's what we're in the middle of. It brings the Lashon that we say, given to our hearts, imbue our hearts with Bina. What's Bina? It says Bina is to understand one thing from another. And he explains what that means is that you begin with a process of Yediyas HaChiyuv. You know something, you know it well, and that leads you to say, but the real thing is not something I know. Yediyas HaShlila, by negating. So is God Chacham? You begin by saying God has wisdom, and then you come to a point where you say He's beyond wisdom. But you can't say He doesn't have wisdom, so you say it's like He's not a Chacham type of thing. And he explains that Yediyas HaShlila is also Yediyah. It's also Bina. It's not faith. But it's a Bina in the grandeur, the hafloah of Ein Sof. So, the lower level, Chetzenius Bina, teaches us what something is. You understand? And Pnimius Bina teaches you the grandeur of it. Its eminence, its magnitude, its quality. So two people can look at the same thing, and the second one will see the hafloah. That's the word he uses. Now to explain that, the last chapter, 102, he goes into Das Elyon and Das Tachton. That there's two perspectives. There's a perspective from below and a perspective from above. And he explains it in two ways. One is Biyah and Atzilus, where Biyah is Das Tachton and Atzilus is Das Elyon. The other is Atzilus is Das Tachton and higher than Atzilus is Das Elyon. That's what we're in the middle of, so just let me sum that up. So he says like this. Das Tachton is that you're the Yesh. I'm it.
Our perception.
Yeah, our perception. I am it. And he goes even further. Not only you're it, but also the Elikus that's inside of you is a state of substance, it has a yesh in it, and the mystery, the ayin, which is not musag, not comprehensible, is that which is beyond, that puts you here. That's the perspective of Bria. Bia. Perspective of Atzilus is the other way around. Is the Elikus, is it, and the ayin is basically insubstantial compared to, because it's only a reflection and a ha'ara, and a diminished reflection of the source. So what we call yesh, it, is from Atzilus' point of view, basically insignificant. From the point of view, we're talking purely, not the kavanah, point of view of how much divine power it has. What's real?
Looking from above down.
Yeah. And he explained an interesting thing. He said that when you say yesh in biyah, it doesn't mean yesh as an ego. It means yesh as an identity. The malachim in biyah, they understand divine, each one in their own way. There's actually a distinction how one malach understands differently. They understand and they feel it differently. However, it's in a concealed state, meaning they exist and they feel the divine within them. And he says, even down below here, where the divine is hidden completely, to the point that we can make a choice and defy our own source that gives us energy, he says we defy it not because it's concealed, we defy it because we were given free will. If we weren't given free will, you wouldn't see it, but you also wouldn't defy it. So a stone, for example, also does not reveal, it's concealed in it, but a stone doesn't defy. That's Atzilus and Biyah. Now, how about higher than Atzilus? So higher it goes like this. Atzilus is completely aligned to Elikus, but it's a structure. It's a structure of Chachma Bina, Chesed Gvura. In that sense, that's a yesh. And the Bligvul that put it here, that's the ayin, because it's unknown to Atzilus. And from the point of view of the Bligvul, Atzilus is an ayin, and that's the yesh, amiti. That's essentially what he said here.
This scenario skips over that Signify, right?
You could, yeah, Signify are similar more to that's like Atzilus, the clothes, yeah. Right, yeah, that's the Signify compared to the Bligvul that's before that. So here's what he says now. He says, at the end of the chapter, he says that this is the difference between Sevu Kalam and Malak Kalam. Das Tachten is Malak Kalam, because you see the energy is manifest in existence, and Sevu Kalam, which is beyond, everything is Kalach Hashiv, it's like nullified. In its presence, that's Das Elyon. I'm just reading the last lines of the chapter. You talk from the emanator to the emanations, it's Das Elyon, it's the level of Das Elyon. Above is the reality. And below, they're only a reflection. So now he continues in Kuf Gimel, which is literally a continuation. And now this Deya, which he's saying Das Elyon, also exists in the emanations. In other words, it's not mutually exclusive. Talk about Mashiach, we've talked before. Because you could say, based on this, you know what? We're locked. How much can we really reach on our own? All we can reach is as much as a yesh can understand that it has a source. But we'll never see it from the perspective of the source, which limits and compromises the interface, because the goal is that we and God should see it eye to eye. So now he's saying, this Deya, even from the perspective from above, we can also discover here. Because remember he's talking about that Atzilus, the Esesres Atzilus tell a story also of Bligvul. Because you could argue, you know what, Atzilus can tell us a story of Gvul, Koyach HaGvul, of God's, but it can't tell us about Bligvul, because Bligvul is out of our grasp. Now he's saying that embedded in our program of Gvul, there's a Bligvuldik elements. What we learned before was the grandeur of something, which is beautiful, because you know, like for example, you can stand in front of the Niagara Falls or other wonders of nature and not be in awe. Hypothetically, it's so what? You have a little water coming out of your faucet, and here you have a lot of water coming. Why are we in awe of it? The awe means because implanted in it is something that's beyond just water hitting rocks. We're able to sense grandeur in things. That's what he said. And I'm going to continue now. This is also Maven Dover Meter Dover. That's the blessing. If we didn't have Maven Dover Meter Dover, you could only understand what you understand. But the fact that you can extrapolate and say, you know what, I understand here, and this, my mind works, and not leading me to understand something else, that's the tool that leads us into places that are beyond. That's really the secret of creativity. Someone tells you a thought, and your mind is able to say, you know what, but that thought leads me somewhere else. And I don't just mean horizontally, but also vertically. In other words, it can lift you to another place. From one thing that you comprehend, you come to a contrary comprehension from the preceding one.
You can actually come.
Well, he says, Harihu ba. You could.
Yeah, you could, but it doesn't mean you always necessarily have to come to contrary.
But he says here, Harihu ba. He does come because he's talking about someone that is traveling. Yeah, of course you could. You could not. You could also not have the first hasaga too. I understand what you're saying. What does that mean? Even though the comprehension of das tacht, meaning our perspective from below, husha savas humayin liyesh, is that creation came from nothing, meaning from an unknown to the yesh, to a known, meaning my substance. Hein b'nivraim v'hein b'netzalin, like I said before, both the creatures of Bria and the emanations of Atzilus, both of them see it that way. That we're here, and we came from some type of mysterious, beyond the doors of perception. What does this mean? That means that the energy and the revelation is in them, is a muhusum mitzias dover. It's something of substance, has a personality and an identity that's comprehensible to them. That's what existence is about, right? We comprehend our state. Bittul ha'er legaba atzmi ha'atzmis hu rak ma she'ena tefes mokim legaba atzmi she'ena be'erech. It's the middle of a phrase, and the bittul ha'er legaba atzmi, and the bittul of this energy compared to the core is only that it's not tefes mokim. Meaning you only feel that you're like insignificant compared to the source, which is infinitely distant. This is the perception of das tachten. So what does it know? Let's make it clear. It's I exist. I have the divine in me, but I have it in a way that I can identify with it. But since I know something mysterious is out there that put me here, so I have a certain bittul to it. My bittul is not tfisas makim. I'm insignificant compared to my source. But you exist. And that's the first hasaga. That's Maven Dover. But this doesn't stop here. It leads you to another conclusion, to a different comprehension that's even actually contrary to this. You come to realize, 1 second, it's not just I'm here and he's beyond and I'm insignificant. That compared to him, everything is upside down. He sees the whole thing differently. That the energy that's sustaining me, is completely nullified. The it's not even a mahus mitzias. What I think is a mahus mitzias, from his perspective, is not real, not substantial. Ayin Beis, and it's truly ayin from that perspective. Parentheses, and this second knowledge, how in other words, it's a perspective of Das Elyon, how Das Tachten sees Das Elyon, that comes from Das Tachten, that comes from your previous comprehension. And because the divine energy manifested and enclosed itself internally and comprehensibly, in other words, because you know that what's inside of you is a reflection, that you are aware of that. So therefore, compared to the source, it's in a form of it has a b'chinas ayin. So the source of it, what you are, is in a form of ayin. In other words, Even das Tachten is not completely me. It's not selfishness. It's an existence that's aware of the divine, but it's aware that the divine is just a reflection. And therefore, I'm insignificant compared to that. But also, we have the ability to also understand it from the source's perspective. That's the chiddush, not just from our perspective. Right, exactly right. I mean, he didn't finish yet. Let's see here. It means that we're able to understand something that is contrary to us, essentially.
From somebody else's perspective.
That's why I said, we're able to understand that from the divine perspective, that's reality, and we're not. Even though, right a second later, you're still in your reality. The im hayes, the shnei hadayes hofchim heim hofchisein, that even though both these perspectives are diametrically opposites, because from the lower perspective, the reflection is a personality and identity, a substantive entity. Well, das alien, it's insignificant. In truth, from the perspective of the infinite divine, they're both true. No, it's not just because now he's asking a question. Since they're opposites, how can we really get that? It's two different worlds. Imagine you look at a stone looks at you. Okay, stone can only get it from its perspective. How can we get a perspective that's coming from a thing that's outside of us, that's not like us? So he's answering because Eid Ein Sof is really higher than both of them. If he was defined by that, we wouldn't be able to get it because he's beyond both. In other words, they're both true. V'zeyin Keil Deis Hashem. This is in Shmuel, the book of Shmuel. It says Keil Deis Hashem. That God is Deus, plural. That their God has knowledges, so to speak. The Shem Keil Nesa Beis HaDeus. That the name Keil of Hashem contains two perspectives. Because due to the desire of Atzmus, Lias Elamus, that there should be a world, Mitzad Zeh Ha'orev Alikis Ubchinis Mitzias Dover. Because let's define. Why is there a das tach in the first place? It's not just because we have absence of wisdom. It's because God created us in a way that we should be that way. So the desire of God there should be a world caused a reflection to be a mitzias dover. He wants us to be an independent entity. And from the perspective of Atzmus, it's insignificant. What does that mean? How could you say these two statements? He wants a mitzias dover, and he wants it to be insignificant. So he says that's because the tzimtzum atzmus, the divine, is concealed. That causes das tachten. But don't make it less divine. The divine wants it to be concealed, and therefore wants a perspective like that.
So it's important.
Yeah. However, through feeling this source, and he says, what does that mean? That there's a root and a source for this reflection, which is now became Mitzias Dover Das Tachten, lower perspective, Hu Gili B'chinas Das Elyon. By sensing that it comes from somewhere, in other words, knowing that which you are, independent entity, and feeling yourself as existence, you know that itself comes from somewhere, that's already giving you a taste of that Das Elyon. Shabbat B'chinas Bitla Biti. That brings them to a state of real bittul. In other words, what he's saying is like this. It's interesting, it's said, but it's an interesting way of putting it. You could say God created a table, chairs, whatever, stones, even intelligent creatures like us. But we're still a creature, and He's the Creator. And the most we can come to is to know that. My creature, identify the Creator. And therefore, obviously, I'm insignificant. The Creator is far, far, far more powerful than I am. He put me here. So I stand in bittul to Him. I stand in awe. I'm subjugated. But the question is that can you know what He's thinking, so to speak? He's saying, yes, you could. That the God, because He wants you to be this way. So you're not just stopping there and saying, I'm a creature that identifies my Creator. I start asking the question, why did He put me here? Why am I a creature in the first place? And then I realized, one second, if I'm a creature, it means God did something to allow me to feel that I'm independent. So I realized there's a tzimtzum. If there's a tzimtzum, what is it like without the tzimtzum? So you're able to reach a lot more than just knowing I'm a creature subjugated to a source. I realize there's a source that's not concealed, and if that source were not concealed, I wouldn't be an independent reality. He wants me to be independent. That tells me that Das Elyon is more than I'm just subjugated as a creature, that I'm completely not Teifus Makim. Because the first level is I exist, but I'm subjugated. Once I come to realize that the whole thing is just because he wants me to be here, you really realize that you're really nothing. Much more nothing. You'll say, he wants me here? Yeah, for that reason I'm here, but only because he wants me here, not because because I need to be here. You understand what I just said? The first level, you could say, the Creator put me here, so I'm bottled him, I'm subjugated, but I'm an entity in my eyes. But when you come to realize you're only an entity because he wants you to be here, and he has a reason for it, so your bittul is far deeper than just of, let's say, a servant to a slave, to a servant to a master. Because you're really getting to see from his perspective the whole thing. That's bittul amiti. I'm trying to think of a way of putting it. Yeah, here's a way of saying it. Let's say someone chooses you to be their messenger. And you meet this person, they're far, far superior to you, and you feel honored to be their messenger, to bring a message to somebody. You bring the message. So, yes, you have bittul, but your bittul is such, I'm not like my messenger, I'm not like the dispatcher, but I'm still, he needed me to do this. So I have a certain value. But then you come to realize that, one second, the messenger created me. My whole being, the dispatcher created me. My whole being is only because he concealed himself from me. So then you realize, one second, I'm like part of a whole master plan. I'm not just an entity that's subjugated to a source. The source has put me here in with my perspective, and therefore you start realizing a whole different type of bittul as a result of that. It's like what the Rabbi says in the Sikha Chaisar to the Shluchim: are you a messenger or a matchmaker? A shadchan or a shliach? A broker is also doing a job, but he has a mitzvah there. He gets something from it. And a shliach is complete channel. Okay.
Is that a little bit more organic, holistic than that? That really your existence is him?
Is what?
Is him.
That ultimately, yeah.
That's,
I didn't say that because he didn't say those words, but ultimately it becomes that. Your existence is him, and and him even deeper than him, because it's him how he's able to conceal himself. Because there's him how he's revealed, and there's him how you are just a product of his concealment, which is far deeper him. If you know what I'm saying. Because the first level is the concealment is you feel yourself as an existence. It's different in Yechud Taton and Yechud Elah. See, Das Tachton, at the end of the day, the problem with it, the limitation of it is, it's a yesh that's bottle, at best. But the yesh is yesh. And on the contrary, the fact that we can't go further says, you know what, okay, he put me here. In my world, I'm going to do what I want. It's almost like compartmentalization. It's almost opposite of real achdus. And there is a shitta like that by Jews. There is those that hold that. It's a certain compartmentalization of Judaism, where, I'm a Jew when I'm a Jew, and now I'm on the terms of the world. And it's two different things. Dina machus dina. A Jew at home and a non-Jew in the street. Now I'm, and they really feel it's two different worlds. But if you understand that Das Elyon also seeps into Das Tachten, there's no such thing. Even when you're doing that, you're there only because God put you there. Not because the Delta's Teifus Malkim, or like in a sense God said, it's like when we say Kodesh and Chol. So Chol comes with an argument and says, one second, you have your domain. It's called Shabbos. Now it's my day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Yes, I'll do everything God wants me to do, halacha, but this is my domain. Here Chol dominates. Here the rules of life dominate. Shabbos, the rules of Kedusha dominate. Again, we're not talking about an Aver. We're saying Maso Matan Bamuna, you follow the rules, but bring me Yichudei Law, doesn't come here. There's no bittul mitzvah. It's bittul hayesh. But you say Das Elyon, you're saying, one second, who put you here? Your chayil. God, the same God put you here for a reason. And the only thing why you're chayil is because he concealed himself more. That's all it is. So really, your whole goal, the goal is to become kodesh. And on the contrary, your chayil has probably more. When you transform it, it's going to even be deeper than Shabbos. So that already is like, but many people have that. They say, Rabbi, come to me when you're in Kippur. But now I'm busy with other things, that type of thing. I mean, we all have this type of... this is fundamentally, essentially, Chassidus Chabad, without the Tzimtzum Kipshute. Without mentioning names, there are theories that are different than this. And they'll call what we're saying, what I just said, some call radical immanence of God's unity, or God's presence. I've heard that from a rabbi. It's the radical, that Chassidim believe in the radical immanence of God's reality, meaning that God really exists.
Sounds pretty good.
I know, but he calls it radical immanence. So I asked somebody, what does he mean by radical immanence? Is he here or not here? But radical immanence means that he's actually, that God is really here, not just hypothetically.
There's no other.
It's subtle Ozav Hashem. It's a subtle form of Ozav. Look, it's easier to see it that way because it's much easier. Achdus Hashem is far.
How do they mean it negative? I can't see everything.
Because they're saying that we're fanatics, basically. We really think that God, they live with God every. Yeah. Right. Radical immanence means that Einoid Movade, don't take it that literally. Okay.
The ultimate reality, wouldn't it be that the ultimate reality is Das Chachton?
So
What I mean by that is that we're possible that ultimately it's an neshama bugu. And ultimately, not just in the spiritual world. So there is going to be physicality.
No, I hear you. I mean, when you say ultimately,
there's nothing else but God. That sounds to me like that's alien. But I'm trying to say that ultimately, if you really want to put ourselves in God's shoes, so to speak, and see it from His perspective, the ultimate true Das Elyon is that there is an emistic Das
that
Figured out about Das
Elyon.
figured out the whole thing about Das
But the Das Elyon is the ultimate for us, from our perspective. Yeah, that's what God wants.
Absolutely. No. Absolutely right. The truth is, you can't talk. This really is a process, a progression. You have to start with where you are and start to extrapolate. And climb. Then you come to what you're saying. Then you come even deeper than that. You come to a point where Atzmus is neither Das Tachon and Das Elyon, and that's why they can become fused as one, and it's like almost no difference. Right.
Is that Deus Hashem? There's not Das Elyon?
No, there's a point where you go higher, where...
Is the unity of Das Elyon and Das Tachon?
Think of it this way, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Eretz Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, before creation, is purely Das Elyon. No Das Tachon at all. Okay? Einod Movade, but there's nothing to talk about. Tzimtzum allows for Das Tachon, that's the Kavanah. Then you start filling this hole of the black hole with light. You start seeping in from the Kav, stuff from Das Elyon. And then more and more and more. Now Das Elyon is starting to join Das Tachton. And then you come to realize, one second, there must be an entity that's beyond both of these that brought them into play in the first place. That's neither bound by Das Elyon. The reason God could create Das Tachton is because He's not bound by Das Elyon. If He was defined by Das Elyon, He wouldn't have a Das Tachton. Or it would be an illusion.
Or Das Elyon, Esau. Also, you say Das Elyon is a creation.
Yeah, and ultimately, because even perception itself. Right. Exactly. But let's not overdo this, because he's speaking here specifically. What he wants to say here is that in Das Tachten, Maven Dover Mitoch Dover, you've come to Das Elyon. Let's just continue. That's where he's here right now. Basically, in other words, in our Gvuldik existence, we're coming to understand the perspective from above. Yeah.
We're sort of putting ourselves in God's shoes.
Yeah. And you're able to do that. Okay, let's continue. And it's also, and that causes a whole different bittul amiti. It's no longer just bittul of heder tfisas makim. Like a bittul of heder tfisas makim means that I'm bittul when I'm in His presence. But when I'm on my own, I'm a pretty big guy, Bittul amiti means even when I'm on my own, I'm not on my own. Even when I'm alone, so to speak, the whole reason I'm here is because He put me here. So it's a real bittul, it's real das elyon. That's a distinction, essentially. There are people when the king comes around, the leader, they suddenly shrivel up. But when he's not there, hey, I'm king. And then there's also bittul amiti. V'yesh b'ha'er beis ha'inyanim. And in the light and energy that flows, in other words, there's two things. Because energy came through a concealment of the core. And nevertheless, he's cleaves to the source. The mitzadat simsum, hu b'chinas mitzias eir, u'mitzadat dveikus, shenigers b'yatzmus b'chinas bittul dekula kamek lachoshev. So he's showing here how the energy itself actually has two tenuas, two movements. One, because of simsum, in other words, think of it like this. The energy in its source is completely just the source, like light in the sun. Now that the light is emerging, we're not talking about in space, we're talking conceptually. So now it's not in the source, but it's light. Because you're diminishing it, you can somewhat grasp it. At the same time, it did not become a keli. It didn't become something else. It's still connected. So it has these two elements. So mitzad that simsum, it feels the words are mitzad that simsum mitziyah seir and mitzad that dveikus bittul. So it's mitziyah that's bittul, essentially. Obaprotius, and more specifically, how is beis madregas ba'er. So it's not that air has two different properties, it's actually two levels in air. The mitzad chitzenius air, from the perspective of the outer dimension of energy, hu b'chinas das tachten. It's a state of das tachten, which means it senses identity. Mitzad primis air, from the inner perspective of the energy, hu b'chinas das elyon. It's a form of das elyon. So in other words, it's not just that light has two properties. It has two levels, actually. Same thing from the perspective of the divine infinite light. From the outer dimension of Ein Sof, which is the head and the root and the source of the emanations. Compared to this level, the energies that come into existence are substantial. Being that it's at least you can call it a source. And the das elyon, which is bittul mitzias, that nothing is there, not even no mitzias from mitzad primis there in sof. That comes from the inner dimension of the infinite divine light. Hadas machlif mokam hakeser. Oh boy, I'll explain. Right. What time is it, by the way? And that's because das machlif mokam hakeser, which I'll explain in a moment. Like it says elsewhere. Okay. Let me explain to you what that means. Mocker, at least. So he's going back to what he spoke about the mocker, Chachmas Dema. Okay, it goes like this. You'll see sometimes they count the 10 spheres. You count Keser, Chachma, Bina. You skip Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Yisrael, Malchus. 10. Always is 10. It can't be 11. And sometimes you don't count Keser. You start from Chachma, Bina, Das. Yes. Question Kabbalah asks, why like this? Sometimes why like that? So the answer is because in one count, Kesher Nimna, Ena Das Nimna. When you count Kesher, you don't count Das. When you count Das, Kesher Nimna, Das Nimna, and Kesher Nimna. So everyone asks the question, what does this mean? Why do you count this one sometimes? Why do you count this one sometimes? Right? And the answer given is, depends whether you're talking the Pnimis Hanyonim or Chitzenius Hanyonim. If you're talking Chitzenius Hamshachas, you're talking the outer dimension of Hamshacha, then you count Kesser. And then you're counting the lower part of Keser, Arich. When you're counting Pnimis, right, the way it becomes a source, it's connected to a source of Atzilus. And why don't you count Das? Because Das doesn't have a Chitzenius. Because Das is a fundamental Pnimi. Even though sometimes it says Chitzenius Das, but it's explained, because Das, Chachma Bina, you could have gradations. In Das, either you get it or you don't get it. That type of hergish. So it says it's a pnimi. Das is a pnimi dika thing. You see, a bar das is someone who internalized it. Right. Hakara Hagosha is kashrus. Senses it resonates. And then when you count on Pnimius, however, then you count Chochmah Bina Das. And Pnimius HaKeser is higher than the source. It's Atik, so it's not counted. Because Atik is always higher. Netak. That's essentially the Kabbalistic concept of it. Obviously, there's more to be said. There's questions on this itself, because then the Maimarim, the Rebbe Rash Abbas, and Tofris Amachei, if that's the case, it's not Kesher Keser Nimna in Adas Nimna. It's always, whenever Keser is Nimna, the lower Keser, because of Chesed, that's always Keser is counted. It's talking about two different, like apples and oranges. So that's a question asked, but that's not relevant to us here. Just pointing it out. Here, why he's bringing it here is because he wants to say, Das Elyon is Mitzad Pnimis. That's what Das Machlif Mokam HaCheser. Because Das replaces... Right, the Pnimis. So when you look Pnimis, that's when Das replaces Keser in the count of spheres, which is the Pnimis HaKeser. So there's no Pnimis HaKeser there now, because Pnimis is not counting, you're counting Das. Essentially what he wants to say is that's Das Elyon, Das.
So there's no Metzias Davar.
Right. That means Das has the ability to recognize no Metzias Davar, exactly. So from the Chetzenius area and stuff, we just said that Das Tachten is able to come to a comprehension. Das Tachten, the lower comprehension, is able to come to understand the higher perspective where everything below is insignificant or is completely non. Yeah, that's what he's basically saying. So essentially, light energy has two levels in it. Chetzenius of Eir and Sof says I'm a source to you, and therefore there's Das Tachten. Chetzenius, when you take Das as Mokim replaces Keser, you're talking Pnimius. But if Das comes to Pnimius of Eir and Sof, then Das recognizes that the Das Elyon perspective. Next page. That's what it says. In the beginning was dark, and then came light. So the Gemara talks about what comes first, Erev and Beker, by Kochim. Does the night come after the day? The day comes after the night. So in Kochim, the night always comes after the day. I'm sorry. The night comes before the day.
In Kochim, the night comes after the day.
Right, in Kochim, the night comes after the day. But like Shabbos and so on, Yom Tov, you go, the night comes before the day. So Bereishach HaShukha, because first it was night, and then came light. So what does that mean? Bereishach HaShukha had Tzimtzum Harishon. Beginning was darkness, means it was the first Tzimtzum. Through that transmitted energy, that's Hadar Nehura, Shubchinis Metzias Davar. Through that, the concealment allowed air to become substantial. For Hadar Nehura,
A separate entity, allowed it to become an entity, right?
Yeah. V'hadar Nehura hu k'mashikosav be'ircha nira'er. The v'hadar Nehura, and then followed came light. He says that's be'ircha nir k'im ch'mokar chayim be'ircha nira'er. What means be'ircha nira'er? In your light was discerned light. What does it mean? Your light nira was we saw light. So it says be'ircha atzmi. In your core light and energy, nira'er shub'chinas ha'ayin shalayesh ha'amiti. Then in your core light, I guess this means the light before the Tzimtzum, I think. Well, let's see in a second. Maybe not. In your core light was recognized the light, the lower light, as the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, that everything is nullified compared to him.
In your light after the Helm was perceived the light before the Helm. Yeah? No?
I don't, maybe. The Nircha Er is higher than the Ercha. That's what we say, but Ercha Atzmi doesn't sound that way. I'm not sure. Let me read another line and let's see, maybe we can get back to this. I'm not sure what he's saying here. Because it seemed to me before, like I thought he was saying, but Ercha Nira Er would mean, but Ercha Lifnei Ad Tzimtzum. Through the Tzimtzum, Nira Er, that's Metzias. That's what I thought. But
Ercha could be the previous Kesser over here.
Yeah, but then how does it work?
Then it's...
So, one second. Let's 1 second. It works like this. There's Atzmis Primis Ha'er is Das Elyon. Chetzenius Ha'er is Das Tachten. Okay? The Tzimtzum allows for Chetzenius Ha'er to take place. The question is, how does it work? What's Ba'er Chanir Er in that context? That's what I'm...
Why don't you...
Let's read it for...
In the Or Atzmi, you see the Ayin Shel Hayesh Amiti.
Right.
That's important.
Of the Das Elyon.
Of the But of the Yeshamit,
of the Das Elyon perspective. But which ercha is ercha atzmi? The er after the tzimtzum or er after before the tzimtzum?
It's a hadar ne'er, it has to be after the tzimtzum.
Right. V'chadar ne'eru k'mei shekasa ba'ercha nira er. I think you're right. Hadar ne'er means ba'ercha. In the er that you have now after the tzimtzum, nira er, the higher level. But then I don't understand why ercha atzmi. You should say, not ercha atzmi, you should say chetzenis instead. So nira er is higher than ercha.
Your light
means
itself.
in the core
Of your er after the tzimtzum. But atzmi, and instead you're able to discern a light that's from the Yesh Amiti from before the tzimtzum. That's what he's saying.
We're only able to see through the second graded order, we're only able to see the Ayin. Everybody sees the word Ayin. Not the way you would see.
Okay, let's continue. I think that's probably what Pashas really means. And this is also what it says. We say, in the beginning, it arose in his will, in his thought rather. It arose to create the world with justice. Like it says, because in truth, truth is creation. Isavus, Havai comes from the word Mahava. Havai is the creator. However, it's only the reflection of Shem Havai, Shem Elikim. So that's the Midas Hadin, Bor Elikim. It comes through the name of Elikim. And then he joined, shittif. He injected into it, whatever, shittif. He included in it. Shittif like shuttif. He partnered within it. Midas harachamim, compassion. Hainu gili etzim shem havaya. So creation came through tzimtzum, Elokim, ha'ara, and then through that he also added a transmission from havaya, the etzim havaya. But derech klal, in general, hu hafresh ben hamshachah the bris elam hamshachah the matan Torah. In general, this is the difference between what was transmitted by the creation and what was transmitted by Sinai, by matan Torah. The hamshachah the bris elam b'chinas das tachten. What was transmitted by the creation, b'chinas das tachten, which is from lower perspective. Al yedei Torah mitzvah mamshichim gili b'chinas das elyon. So by creation, what we have is God created a world. So we have a world that has its perception. That's das tachten, and through Torah and mitzvahs, we start seeing it though. You bring the gili of God's perspective, the divine, the higher perspective. So generally speaking, it says by creation right away with shitafim midas harachimim. But in general, when did it really happen? By Matan Torah, because then you had Anochi Hashem Elikecha, not just Elikim, but Anochi Hashem Elikecha. And in general, in the energy is the two levels. That mitzad, from the perspective of the tzimtzum, the air, the energy is in a form of substance. Mitzad hadveikus, it's going back to what he said before. From its cleaving to the source, to the core of b'chinas kala. It's in a form of nullification. Yeah, you have to say that's what he meant. Yeah. Now he goes back to the whole thing. So let's just sum up what we just learned briefly. Briefly he said that even though there's two opposite perspectives, they both are true. And that even in the Das Tachten perspective, you can also get Maven Dover Medech Dover, you can come to Das Elyon perspective. That's what he basically said. And that he's explained there's really two levels in the process. One is the Chetzeni Se'er level, which there you still feel it's air, you feel God, you feel the divine, but it's a divine within you. So you are subjugated to the source, but you're not complete bittul. Then comes the pnimius, you come to the deeper understanding that really from the source all this is just kala chashiv, it's completely nullified. And this is the difference between Bria Se'elam and Matan Torah, essentially. What happens through Aveda, what you have on your own, and what happens through Aveda. So on your own, you can come to a perception, but it's going to be a limited one. You don't have the perspective from the other side. And it's the tzimtzum that gives mitzias it gives its mitzias, and its devekus is what gives its bittul. And this is going back now, means that the heavens tell us the story of God's glory, Kael. The Shem Kael, he Kael Beis Adeis. That's the connection. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So Kael, we said Kael Deis Hashem. That Kael concludes to that. So Shemayim is telling you not just one day that God exists. It's also telling you the second perspective. Wow, that's nice. You see the diuk in the Pardes.
That's nice.
Huh? Yeah. The Shem Kael, hu Kael Beis Adeis. Canal. Upirish Kfeit Kael. What's Kfeit Kael? Upirish Kfeit Kavod Tata. That's the lower glory, the lower honor. Is there any other name for Kavod? Honor, glory, dignity. Yeah, it's respect. It's respect, obviously. Like it says in the Zohar right in the beginning, 8a, Kavod Kala. This is the Kavod Kala. We honor the queen, the bride rather. So that's Kavod Kael is Kavod Tata, that Lamata Yesh, you exist, and Lamaila is Ayin, I don't understand. It's not comprehensible. Valkein Nikra Kala, that's why she's called Kala. Meloshin Kolsa Nafshi. My spirit goes out, is Kolsa, is yearning, is reaching, is expiring. What's Kolsa? Rising. It's the Kvayachulu, inspiring. Because it's not comprehensible, Nasat Samoyin. That causes the thirst. I want something. That's Kala. So Kala is seeking. Quenches thirst.
A dry container.
It's quenches thirst. Hashamayim Misaprim. So now he goes back to the meaning. So we have, what do we say? Hashamayim Misaprim Kfeid Kael. Kael is both days, and Kfeid, he says, the lower Kavod. Hashamayim Misaprim, and the heavens tell the story. What means Misaprim? Misaprim u'me'irim. From the word also me'irim, behirus. They tell and radiate, illuminate. B'chinas ha'koved liyaz b'hem gili das elyon. I know, but he didn't go there yet. Yeah, but that's saying Misaprim. This story also illuminates to some extent. It's revealing b'chinas ha'koved liyaz b'hem gili das elyon, that in koved tata, in the Kala, in Kvoit Kael, should be the higher dimension. These been Gili Dasein, that they should have the Gili, the revelation of the higher perspective. Aidei Hergish Ha'atzmus, through sensing the core, Shenasa B'ma bittul, that causes them to have the bittul v'zein hashuv. So she has rotzei. He's basically saying Hashemayim Misaprim Kfeid Kael is including two things. Kfeid Kael means both perspectives. And what's Kfeid Kael? Because Kfeid Kael is the respect, the honor, or the glory, or the respect of Kael. He says is really the lower Kavod, but it's getting in it the higher Kavod. So I'm not sure. Mishamayim Misaprim Kfeid Kael that it misaper both Kavod, Tata and Kavod, or it tells and radiates into the lower Kavod Kael from both days. That's what it looks like. Kfeid Kael. So simply put, the stories relate to us the honor of God. But what's the honor? The honor could be the lower level Kala. Yeah, Kavod Tata. And that, because it's Kael, coming from Kael, even the Kala gets her thirst quenched by getting a Tas Elyon, and then comes the Shuv. So it's resolved. Resolution after the tension. The calls and all this is because the air is b'chinas ha'er, and all this is because is the level of air being that it is bound, cleaved to its source. The gam b'chinas ha'rotzei, also the level of rotzei, that also the level of yearning, hu mitzad ha'dveikus. Also, the yearning of the Kala is because of its cleaving, its being bound to the source. Like we learned before, chapter 91, about the nature of flame. If you remember, he talked about a flame that without the wick that grounds it, the flame on its own is reaching upward. That's the way it should be. So he's saying even Kala on its own, even the Kavod Tata, The Kolsh came bechinis hashuv. He's basically explaining that even in the nidgel stage, even the lower stage, it's also a yearning. But the Kolsh came for sure bechinis hashuv, where the Das Ayin is revealed. The Kvoit Shemayim, the Shemayim Besapim, they reveal. There too, Shazam Mitzad Gili Atzmus, Hazam Mitzad Advekas Dilei Sedov Mekir Yesh Behergish Atzmus. Because there's the revelation of Atzmus, that it comes from the cleaving to it. By cleaving, that causes it to have that feeling.
So even though yearnings comes from Richo,
Yeah.
you couldn't have a yearning if you weren't somehow.
Let me see. Yeah, exactly. Right. Because there's a step where you don't even.
Something like, if
Yeah,
I don't want it at all.
Right. Exactly right. So that's why it's Maven Dover Metech Dover. Because that's why. Remember, the interface here is critical. That you want it to be on your terms, not that just God sent you a Hamshacha. So on your terms, you're able to sense something, a distance, and you're thirsty. Since you're thirsty, there's a response that quenches your thirst, and that's a higher level. Yeah, because that's a critical component throughout, that he wants it to be on your terms and on the divine terms. And if you were so distant that there was no, as you said, no yearning, there's no keli here altogether. You're not even reaching. Good point.
Sure.
Then goes and said, "V'zeu inyan sha'eres liyesem b'chinas hatzilas." This is all coming to explain. This is inyan that the eres, being that they're not tzilas, so they're ready. Some revelation. Because remember, the whole point here is that Atzilus is revealing the Bligvul. So you have to have something to begin with. So Atzilus is the beginning. Atzilus is the divine emanations. So he says like this. So Atzilus being that there's eris in there, so they already have a dveikus, they have a sense, even though it's a metzias. They're existent and they're on their own, they're das tachten. They mesaper, magala. They reveal, they tell, they relate and reveal the level of the higher perspective, how everything is nullified by him, compared to him. Bittul by er gufa, and this bittul is an air itself, shubchinas metzias dover. And this level of bittul is in the energy itself, which is now of substance in Atzilus. It becomes in a state of total nullification because of the sense of Atzmis, of the core, of the source. This is an example for the unity, the divine unity down below in Tachtenim. And the revelation of this is in Atzilus. In Atzilus, this is revealed. Atzilus reveals even the Bligvul, as he just said, even the beyond. But below, down here, you need Torah and mitzvahs to present, to illuminate the higher perspective. Also below, this is already the innovation, the chidush, the new thing that happens through the unity that happened at Mount Torah compared to creation. So in other words, from Atzilus' point of view, Atzilus was created. It doesn't need any Avodah. Atzilus on its own reveals those higher levels. But if you want to reveal them down here, then you need Chidush. Because that's Gilei Helam. Atzilus just reveals the concealed. And reveals even that concealed dimension of Das Elyon. And below you need it through Torah mitzvahs. That's the Chidush. Because below we need a Chidush. Because we're not revealing the hidden. Here there's actually a new Yesh. There's a Yesh. A real, substantial Yesh. And this is the meaning that Sefirah are from the word. He's concluding now the second interpretation from the word story and narrative. This is higher than number that we spoke earlier, which is the level of Malchus. Malchus, if you remember, because of its containers, you can count them. Higher than Malchus is really the number of count is more qualitative. It's a count that is higher than count, as we discussed earlier. And story, the narrative, is in general levels that are higher than Malchus. And this is already the dimension. The containers are revealing the energy. So now he's summing up the whole thing. Remember we summed up that much earlier we learned that misper, the number, is primarily kelim, that recognize in number, in quantity, you recognize quality. But you go higher than Malchus, number becomes less of a substantive thing, but story becomes a bigger, important thing. Now what story is it telling? So the first story is a lot of levels here. So the first level of the story is that it's revealing, is the levels higher than Malchus, which means Kalim revealing air. That was chapter, if you recall, that was the first chapter's 95. No, I'm sorry, no, even earlier. What am I talking about? No. That was chapters 91 and on. From 91 and on, he explained this thing, how Kalim Megala air. Remember the whole thing with fire, and how without the container, without the faculty, the air expires on its own. That's the first step. It's a whole summary of the whole sections. Then goes V'gam, the next step, which begins at chapter 91. Then the next step was 95 and especially 96 and on. V'gam sh'adei Kalim va'eres u'b'chinas gilei l'kush be'elamis. No, I'm sorry. That was still earlier. No. That also through the containers and the energies, you have the divine revelation in the worlds. The Agbolas HaMisper, the confinement, the definition, and the parameters of number, Huliyas, Bechinas, Hametzias, the Elamis. There, it's really relates more the Agbolas HaMisper, Huliyas, Bechinas, Hametzias, the Elamis, is because there's existence of worlds. So there's a number. This world is defined by numbers, by kalim, if you remember. Containers define quantity, that we live in a world of numbers. And sipur, the second meaning in spheres, comes generally to tell us that there's a revelation of the divine in the world. But that's still everything in the first discussion. This is all 91 through 94. That's the revelation of the energies of Atzilus, revealing them in the world that exists. That we have Chesed and Gvura. But now he goes to Machshavas HaNalamis. What about the hidden things that Atzilus reveals? So Sipur already tells us more than a number. A number tells you that existence has a number, and you try to appreciate from the number that which is behind the number, the deeper element. Sipur is telling you a story, the story of Elikus. Not the number that's telling you about higher. It's telling you the story of godliness in this world. That's level one. Then comes and more specifically, it's the energies of Atzilus that reveal the hidden thoughts. That's the Maimorim of Tzad. That's where it starts 95 and on. 95 all the way through 98. That is now revealing the source, the 10 hidden spheres. And then, now comes finally what he learned in this Maimer, chapter 99 and on. They also reveal They also reveal the infinite. So three things that the spheres tell us, that the Sipur does, that the Misper doesn't. Misper, again, is more about the structure of existence. Sipur tells us, number one, it reveals the divine. Number two, it reveals the source of the divine in the structure, which is basically the 10 hidden spheres, and then now it reveals the infinite. To know the level of the divine that is the grandeur, mufla, that's wondrous, and exalted, and how it is beyond us. In other words, to know the existence of Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, and how that infinite divine light exists. And also, how compared to Atzmus, everything is nullified. It's a whole different level of knowledge now. Now, we're not talking about understanding how God created existence and revealing the divine within the structure. Now we're talking about revealing the divine on its own terms. That's beyond the structure. And now the structure is completely nullified compared to it. Shagilu ba'atzilus, and this gili isn't atzilus, but they Torah mitzvahs agili gam lamata. And through our efforts and bringing Torah mitzvahs, we also bring this down, this perspective also below. Without atzilus, it's going back to the whole, would not have any of these revelations. It's only through the creation, bringing into being atzilus specifically, which reveals the concealed. That's how all these revelations come to be. And this is what it says in Sefer Yitzirah. That is v'dabru behem b'rotzev v'shuv. They v'dabru behem and speak with them in a form of rotzev v'shuv, yearning and return, tension and resolution. Meaning that the revelation of the energy is natzilus in a form of speech. What is that? He says in parentheses, ve'in rotzev v'shuv b'chinas das tachna v'das elyon canal. That speech, das tachna, as we said, the kala is rotze, she's hungry, thirsty, and das elyon is the response, shuv. Misaprim kveit kel, that you quench that thirst. V'gam v'dabru hu b'chinas malchus da'ak. The level of v'dabru is also the level of malchus of ak, oi malchus de ein seif, or the level of malchus of ein seif. Shezeh Ayin b'chinas sipur. Because remember, we're talking everything. If you remember, he spoke everything on those levels of malchus. If you remember, there was a place where he spoke about malchus of atzilus, malchus of ak, and malchus of ein seif. Said that earlier. I have to find it, but he said it earlier. Anyway, so bottom line, on all levels you have this element of malchus dibur. If you remember that there's malchus, how it's beyond dibur, the way we said ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh. Where was that? That was, I think it's chapter 95. The bottom of 184, one page 184. Okay, so that's malchus. Because malchus is always the one that tells the story in order to reveal energy. And as Ashleim, we can say this is what Rabbi Shem Tov said. Remember when he said Hashemayim, just like dibur and michtav, just like speech and a letter or a writing, explains. Why does he say dibur? Hadibur b'chinas ha'er. Dibur is the level of energy. V'amichtav hu inyan hakelim. And michtav is already, when you write it down, it's the level of containers. Like it says in Likud Torah in the Maimer of Zeis Chuk Satera, and the explanation of Imbuchu Kesei, that the containers of Atzilus are like the letters of writing. So therefore, now we have the Rebbe Shem Tov that Dibur is the Eir, V'dabru, and that's the Eir revealing, the Eiris of that, and the Kelim is
like it says by the word Hashem.
I'm sorry, say that again. So one second. What I just said, I said Dibur is the Eir, then comes
That's how one we can say Ketzir.
Why do you say that? Oh, because the Dabru is Ur. Yeah, because it's all, listen, it's ultimately Ur is the revelatory force. But Kalim are critical, because Kalim, without Kalim, you don't have the Ur manifesting. If you recall, that was a long discussion. So it's the Kalim that really reveal the Ur, but the Ur then together, he keeps saying, Ur and Kali reveal far more. A Kali on its own doesn't reveal anything. A Kali grounds the Ur, and together, it's like, let's put it this way. If a person doesn't have, God forbid, the containers, the instruments, the faculties of the soul remain concealed. Once you have the instrument, let's say the arm, now your seichel can go into your arm, you can write. But what does it write? Far more than just the hand. It writes the ideas that the is bringing in. And that is transmitting, first it's transmitting the revealed, then the concealed, the keiches nalamim, like you said, hamshachan nalamas, hasagan nalamas, a deeper dimension of intelligence, and then it reveals the asalyan bligvul. But without the the keli, all it is just a inanimate keli. So what he breaks it down is that the michtav part is the container. The dibur is the The Sefirah dibur includes both das tachna and das elyon. And so it's like that. So it's like essentially the container is the channel that then allows the air to channel everything else into you, to existence. Yeah. Do we conclude the mimer, or we should stop here? Okay, so we'll stop here. It's a long chapter. It's another whole paragraph. We'll stop here. So we did chapter 103, page 197 and 198, and summarizing, concluding the section of Sefirah comes from the word story, and the whole story that's told, discussed in this chapter. We finished 103. We didn't finish the mimer, where he actually sums up and explains the pasuk. El Toldos.
It's at the end of 103.
Yeah, essentially. But then we'll do it. Okay, we'll stop here.
Right.